They asked me to do a short introduction, tell you a little bit about myself. I did a bachelor's degree in music education at Ball State University in Indiana. I did the administration and supervision degree at UNO here in town, and I am currently a doctoral candidate in curriculum and instruction at LSU. In my free time, I also conduct musicals at the Baton Rouge Little Theater as one of their music directors. What we're here to talk about today, and what I hope to share with you a little bit, is information about the visual and performing arts legislation that was passed last summer, which was Act 175. And I'm hoping to tell you a little bit about that. This is how it started. Talk to you a little bit about what we've done so far and where we're hoping to go. It started with this idea that the Division of the Arts did some research. This is all pre-Katrina data that you're seeing up there. And what they found was that it was the second largest employer, the culture and tourism business. A lot of people like to come down to Louisiana to do exactly what they're doing in the French Quarter right now, to check out the arts. It was one of the reasons why I came to Louisiana. I had a couple of job offers around the country. I came down here to be a teacher in St. Charles Parish because of the culture, because I wanted to get the music. I thought, well, if I'm ever going to get a chance to play, it's going to be down here. It certainly isn't going to be up in that northeast corner of Tennessee, which was the other offer I had. The only culture there was the Hatfields and the McCoys. But the state was working. They've passed Broadway South, $934 million generated from culture, recreation, and tourism. And the money that's spent on arts programming, 90% of that stays here in Louisiana. And these were some of the reasons why Mitch Landrieu helped push through that legislation. Had it not been for him, I'm not sure if it would have happened. It was his weight that helped get that through. And I'm going to say at any point, if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. The legislation does have a rollout. It's a 5-year process, which we are now nearing the end of the first year. And that is, we were going to do revisions of the curriculum guides for dance, music, theater, and the visual arts. Second year, provide professional development, which is what we're hoping to do. About a year from now, we're going to go around. Don't really know what that's going to look like yet, because if you're going to do professional development, you have to have the it. And we're now starting to put the final touches on the it. In 2009 and 10, we are going to do some piloting around the state. We are looking at about 150 to 200 schools where we're going to take this curriculum out and pilot it and see what we can learn from it. In 2010, 2011 is when we anticipate full implementation. Full implementation means K through 8, 60 minutes of visual arts and 60 minutes of performing arts, every student, every week. That's what the legislation does. And then at the high school level, it requires public high schools to offer courses in the visual and performing arts. And because the legislation is written that way, if somebody asks me about fine arts survey, I'm going to refer them back to visual and performing. Committee members, we brought in about 65 individuals, one of whom is with us today, 65 individuals that represented 7 different universities, about 15 different parishes from around the state. All of the arts are included. We have arts educators as well as teaching artists who may not be certified as educators but do work with kids. Trying to think. Of the committee chairs, when I added up the committee chairs, we ended up with 343 years of experience just between those 12 individuals. So I was very happy and very pleased with what was going to happen. And what I can tell you is we've been working on it. Last week we had our final meeting where they were starting to organize the documents. We met in October as a group and I put this charge to them. From October till now, they've created about 2,000 pages of model lessons for all of the arts. Those model lessons are based on our own standards and benchmarks, which were created by Louisiana educators. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. We covered that. At the elementary level, we also included regular classroom teachers who are on the elementary committees to look at the lessons for two things. One, interdisciplinary connections, where we can cover some of the Louisiana grade level expectations and do arts education at the same time. The charge I gave them, don't put a square peg in a round hole. If it doesn't fit, we're not going to force it. Their other charge was also to read just for feasibility, so that not to water down a lesson, but to read the lesson and say, I need more explanation. You're going to have to tell me a little bit better. Because in Louisiana, from K through 8, music educators teach music, but someone who is elementary certified can also teach the arts K through 8. So that's why we had that piece in there, and I was very clear. They were not to water down the lessons, just to make them more explicit. We also brought in a literacy consultant. Right now, the Department of Education is very interested, as you can well imagine, in literacy studies. So there's a consultant who's working with the committees, reviewing the lessons that include, we have about 16 different literacy strategies. And the literacy strategies that we are working in right now are the same strategies that are currently being revised in the guides for English, math, science, and social studies. Again, so if an elementary certified teacher uses the arts in her classroom, the literacy strategies aren't going to look different. She is going to already have seen them before. And I think that's also a very positive thing. Elementary committees, we're charged with creating sampled lessons addressing individual benchmarks. We have 4 standards, just to explain the structure for you, 4 standards. They are creative expression, aesthetic perception, historical and cultural perspective, and critical analysis. Underneath each of those, there's anywhere from 5 to 7 benchmarks. At the elementary level, what I asked them to do is take each of those and write a model lesson for that benchmark, so that, and I had them think of a teacher who has been teaching for about 3 years. That was our target audience that we were writing to. To create interdisciplinary connections, we mentioned that before, and incorporate the literature. That's what they do. The arts writers develop sample lessons based on benchmarks, develop assessments that align with benchmarks and content, and again, incorporate the literacy strategy. The arts writer could be the teaching artist or the arts educator. Classroom specialists, again, we talked about that, identifying GLEs. As you're thinking about, those of you that don't know what GLEs are, we have standards, which are these broad, overarching concepts that I just mentioned. And underneath those, we have benchmarks, which are in clusters, K through 4, 5 through 8, and 9 through 12. We do not have GLEs in the arts, but what I like to think of the other 4 content areas have gone to that next level, which is to take benchmarks and be even more specific about them and make grade level expectations, where they say what a student should know or be able to do in math, English, science, and social studies at each grade level. So the classroom specialist looked at GLEs and tried to see if there was a GLE that matched the lesson that the arts writer had written. If they could find one, or if it was close, said, can we nudge a little bit and get one in there? Again, the mindset being that if there's a general educator out of there who's going to teach the arts, the mandate that they're going to be under from their principal is cover the GLEs. And we knew that too. And that's enough of that slide. We took a little bit different structure, again, just because we didn't have the money to bring in general educators for 5 through 8 or 9 through 12. So our choice was to have them write lessons using creative expression, that standard, which is where we think of as student as musician or student as artist. If you read the benchmarks in there, you're going to go, ah, okay, that's student as performer. The other three standards are student as performer, but is also student as audience and developing a thoughtful audience. What we asked them to do is take one benchmark from creative expression and pair that with one of the other benchmarks in another standard, so that we're not just, if we do history, for example, and we talk about Bach, we're not just going to talk about Bach without doing some Bach. That was the mindset. There was not going to be any more, this is not a sit and get kind of thing. This is a stand up and perform and learn by doing. That is definitely the model that we took with middle and high school. That gives you, they asked me when I was first trying to put this together, they said, well, how many do you anticipate having? And that took some time to try and estimate. And this is sort of just another way of explaining how we figured out how many. There are 23 benchmarks, 22, 23, 24, as you can tell, at the very top line in our benchmarks for each of the content areas. And then we divided that. I figured kindergarten, probably not every benchmark needed to be done in kindergarten. So we did half in kindergarten. And the next section of benchmarks, same number of benchmarks, and this was just to figure out how many. Total number of benchmarks, less the creative expression, because we're going to add creative expression down in here. For music, we did instrumental and vocal, so that's why they have a larger number here, is we have lessons that are tailored strictly to instrumental music and strictly to vocal music. You take this, all of this together, times 2 on this chart, and that's the high school. It looks identical, and it came out to about 1,088 model lessons for K through 12 arts education, which is probably the biggest thing that has happened in arts education in this state since the standards and benchmarks were originally developed in '97. Very exciting. A question I've gotten before is, well, did you just come up with this out of thin air, or did you actually look at some other states? And I did. Looked at Hawaii, Missouri, North Carolina, and Rhode Island. And again, if you'd like some of these links to double check and see where some of these ideas came from, I can tell you that the model we're using, the template we're using to create lessons, is based off of what we've done in this state, and probably, I'd say mostly what Hawaii had done. It seemed to be the best fit for us and what we like to do in this state. How does this legislation improve things as they currently exist in Louisiana? And I will say that this legislation, probably one of the greatest things that it has brought about is conversations just like this. It has gotten people once again talking about arts education in our state. It has legislated what was current policy, and it makes it stronger. In the legislation, it says all students. That also means special needs. That is gifted and talented, and that runs the gamut to students that need more attention. And I don't know that we're fully prepared for that yet. So that's one, again, it's necessary and it's an improvement. I believe that to be an improvement. We're hoping that it's going to increase enrollment. I think the guides, what we did is these are to replace the guides that we had already had developed in 1992. And we hadn't really, we did 92, 97 were the standards and benchmarks, and then nothing else had occurred since 97. We had revised the benchmarks in 2000, we had revised them in 2003, but past that, nothing had happened. Our curriculum guides for dance and theater were one document, K through 12, and it was about 70 pages. Now we're going to have a document for elementary dance and elementary theater, for middle school dance and middle school theater, and high school. It's a great step forward for dance and theater education. K through 8 arts education is strengthened. Districts, I'm not going to mention any, but I will tell you that I spoke with the district supervisor, and as soon as he saw this come out, in November, he told me that they have already begun the process of hiring more arts and music teachers for their schools for this upcoming school year, so that by 2010-2011, they will be fully staffed. And again, if we've gotten one more arts educator hired in a school that didn't have one, I think that's a great step forward for our state. The other thing I should also share, it's not on there, there's another university. There are 2 universities in this state which currently offer the coursework to certify a dance educator. Both of them are private. One is next door at Tulane, and the other one is up in Shreveport at Centenary. Offer dance education. Our first public university is now beginning the process of creating a dance education curriculum for their students. They were going to do an MFA, and after they saw this happen, they're like, oh, we need to switch gears, and they moved it from an MFA to dance education. I'm not going to mention them on air just because, to respect them, they're not done with that process, but very excited to see that happen. I'd also say that had there been dance education, I probably would have ended up a dancer. What are you going to be responsible for? That statement up there it comes from the preamble to Article 8 of the Louisiana Constitution, which is the goal of the public educational system is to provide learning environments and experiences at all stages of human development that are humane, just, and designed to promote excellence, in order that every individual may be afforded an opportunity to develop to his full potential. That's the preamble to the section on education. That's what you're already responsible for if you're an educator in Louisiana, is creating learning environments and experiences that are designed to promote excellence. How do you do that? You use the benchmarks. That's one way. You talk to people. You come to places like this to talk to people and learn more. It's not going to happen in isolation anymore. Those days are behind us. If we don't stand together, they're going to take us apart, because that's what's been happening. These are some questions we don't know the answers to right now. We don't know where the money, how much money, that's a question I get frequently. How much money do we spend on arts education? And the best answer I have is I don't know. Arts Ed NJ, New Jersey has just completed, as of about 6 months ago, completed a census where they went through 98% of their schools and found out, and they can tell you with a high degree of certainty how much is spent on arts education. And it wasn't the big numbers that stuck with you. What they found, 6 cents for elementary students per day on arts education. 6 cents. 14 cents for high school students per day. Now, if I tell you the big number, that's not going to stick with you, but instantly the first thought you had was, wow, we can do better. No matter what that number is, we can do better. Arts education is one of the most expensive endeavors in a school. It requires a lot of materials and supplies. It's not cheap. How do we ask for more? You have to think about what is the purpose that you want to spend the money for. You try and match it to the mission statement that the school has, and you let them see how helping you helps them. And I've done an article on that, and my email is going to be at the end of this slide, and we'll talk about, if you'd like to get that, how do you go about asking for more money? Right now, you have to figure out when the budgetary cycle is. They've already begun to spend the money and think about how the money is going to be spent. That starts in March for the next school year. So waiting till the school year that you need it is too late. It's too late, and you're going to get whatever scraps are left. You have to get on their priority list up at the front end. How can you help? Use the benchmarks. We talked about that. Involve parents for advocacy efforts. One of the last pieces, if you read that legislation, it's only about 2 or 3 pages long. Once you get to the last lines, you start to see that this all becomes moot if it's not funded by the legislature. What can you do? You write your legislature and you say, your legislator, and you say, this is important. There was a study done by the Education Commission of the states where they called and talked with policymakers around the country. What they found was pretty conclusive. All of them said, arts education is important. They also said they never hear from their constituents on the issue. If they're not hearing from you, to them it's not broken. It doesn't need attention because that's what they deal with all the time. They're not going to come and say, hey, you know, we have this extra money. Who wants this extra money? We have to get in line for it, and we have to talk to them and tell them and get their voters to tell them if it's important to them or not. You talk with school board members. You talk with principals. I will say I was a school teacher. My first job was in St. Charles Parish as a band director. And while I can't come out to a district and say, you have to do it this way, the parents, here's the story. So the parents said, you know what, we've got this great little elementary music program going on. They've got a really good choir at the high school, but there was nothing in the middle. Well, at the end of that summer, I had walked back into my school, and they said, congratulations, Mr. Baker, you are now also the choir director. The strength of the parents, you have to depend on it. You have to get it involved. In this state, while I can't come out and say anything, if the parents come in, they're the people that the legislators, the policymakers respond to. At the bottom, I've got a website there, and I have a letter to share with you. This is a sample letter. It's not the letter, but I wrote a letter to my own school board member because I thought it was important. Because I saw some great things going on in the school district in which I reside, and I wanted to let my school board member know that this was important to me. So I took that, I've modified it a little bit. I have this on my flash drive. If you'd like it, I'm willing to give it to you, and you can do whatever you want with it. At the top of it are 2 websites. One is the one that's on there right now. If you go there, you can put in your zip code, and it'll tell you who your state senator and who your state representative are. The other website is for the state school board member, and you can figure out who represents you on this nice map, or on the back side, I have all of the state school board members. There are 11. 1 represents you, and then there are 3 at-large members who were appointed by the governor. You can write to all 3 of them, and whichever one represents your district. I'm just going to leave these up here for now for you. Talked about that. This is my space on the Department of Education's website. If you come to louisianaschools.net, you click on that website, or you type that website in, you click on the purple curriculum tab, and then on that page you will see a series of pull-down menus. One will be for the arts, and underneath it it'll say web resources, and that'll bring you to this page. I put this up here, and even though you probably can't see it, on this page at the very bottom is the copy of the legislation that you can check out. So if you just come to that website, also at the bottom of this page, you'll see all of these icons sorted again at the bottom, and underneath each one of those are a series of links for different things pertaining to each one of the arts. We hear a lot of talk about change. I'll tell you, I did that slide a couple of years ago before we all started talking about change. What you're seeing is the side of, I think it's the AT&T building in Shreveport, Louisiana. That was a community project. The faces you see on there are people that live in Shreveport. The people that painted it were the people of Shreveport. Change is inevitable. Progress is optional. Don't take a wait-and-see approach. It hasn't worked very well for us the last 15 years. If you, as music educators, and now I'm going to talk to the future music educators that are sitting in this room. When you go out, right now you're in this lovely community of Loyola, and it is a lovely community. It's where I found my wife. She's a lovely person. She's also a music educator. And you're surrounded by experts. But when you go into the community as the band director, as the choir director, you've now been elevated to that position of music expert in that community. And if you're not going to speak out for it and encourage other people to speak out for it, who is? Who are you waiting for? You are going to be the experts. And we need you, and you're very important. That's my contact information. Any of these slides that you have up here, I'll share with some other things. I'll just leave them on the table over here. I brought standards and benchmarks, but I have a feeling most of the people in this room know what they are. These are the standards and benchmarks for music education. You can take a look at those. The other thing I brought for you, I do an e-bulletin about once a month that goes out to school district supervisors for the arts, goes to university professors, goes to the professional organizations. Anybody that I have an email for ends up with a copy of this about once a month. And what I did is I brought the front pages for about 3 months where we talked a lot about what I've just shared with you today. And that's in here. So if you'd like to just have a little thumbnail of what happened today, rather than printing you off a whole bunch of slides, I thought I'd give you this instead, which is a little bit better reading. Do you have any questions for me? You've been a lovely audience. Any questions about this legislation, what it means, what it's going to do, how it might affect you? I will open up the floor.
So are we supposed to use the...
Might I add, not only a question, but if anyone has any comments, anything that you can add to this, I think we would be greatly appreciated. Do we see it? I have to go.
I think they'd like you to use the microphone so that they can get it recorded.
Going back to what you were originally saying about literacy in reference to the curricular development, are you referring to musical literacy or literacy in general? Could you further define what literacy is in this context?
Literacy, as it first evolved for us, was that more classical sense of book reading, that kind of literacy. Now, there's a lot to that. I'm really oversimplifying that. When my writers asked me that question, and they said, Richard, what about music literacy? What the department asked us to do was use certain strategies. And what I told the writers, so long as you use that strategy, if you can make music literacy using that strategy, the invitation was open to them. So to say that they had to stick to just, okay, now kids, turn your books to page 364 and that was not what we were doing. And that's, as I've read through these lessons, that's not what it is. Probably the most used strategy in the curriculum guides is something called a learning log, where students reflect upon what they've been doing that day. That's probably the most used strategy in our lessons right now. Does that answer the question?
But I'm still curious about how music literacy itself applies and what musical literacy is to you, perhaps, or to the aggregated people here. What is musical literacy? Is it manipulating musical the elements of music like solfege or rhythmic solfege. That's one aspect of it. Is it understanding how music is used ceremonially, cultural literacy, as it applies to music? So when we're music educators and we're teaching what is called the performing arts, does that only simply mean to teach children to perform? I think not. I think it's very important that children be taught musical literacy and how that applies to cultural literacy. And cultural literacy is a very, very broad subject. But what is musical literacy? My mentor, Ed Gordon, says it's manipulating the materials of music through certain specific solfege techniques, movable do with a la bass minor, different rhythmic solfege that are based on beat function rather than the traditional way. So there are many different ways that the materials can be taught to be manipulated. I think that's really what musical literacy is. Manipulating, just like artists do, just like visual artists manipulate paint. We have to learn how to manipulate tones. And this is what's very hard to teach. That aspect of it is what is really hard, and that's what takes specialists.
Yes.
So if somebody like me, somebody like you, going into a classroom to teach an elementary teacher how to do that, that's a big burden. That's a very difficult thing to do. I think it's possible, but there has to be a system that enables us to do this. So the question of literacy is, I think, at the crux of what we're here to talk about, perhaps, if anybody agrees with me.
And my response to that is, with the benchmarks that we have, we cover historical and cultural perspectives. And that's what we've asked folks to write to. So we are covering a lot of those things. My perspective, as I've seen a lot of emphasis on performance, and I've seen a lot of emphasis on production of art. But I haven't seen as much about why it is that way. Why is it that we respond to arts in the way we do? And the lessons, these model lessons that are now being developed, take each one of those and give you an example of what not a classroom teacher, but an arts education specialist and an arts teacher and a teaching artist, what they think, how they've interpreted that benchmark at each grade level from K through 12. And so I'm hoping that we are going to be addressing arts literacy using the standards and benchmarks, which are developed from two things. Our standards and benchmarks come from discipline-based arts education and the national standards. With only one exception, I can go through the music benchmarks, and I can find two national standards for each one of our benchmarks. In our state, another comment that comes up a lot is, well, I just do the national standards. We've responded to the national standards through our document. So if you're teaching in Louisiana, our document is the one that you need to be using.
So I guess a slightly different question, but I was wondering, can you track how many music educators there actually are practicing in the schools in the different districts that you oversee in Louisiana?
We do have a way to collect that data, but honestly, for the last year, I've been very busy working with this project. But yes, we can.
I mean, I guess because it seems that one great possibility through this project is to be able to actually assess what happens as a result of the curriculum development and the benchmark work that you're doing. And obviously, you would like, I'm assuming, the outcome to be, at the end of the day, as you said, at least one more music educator than when you started. And obviously, you'd love it if that were a greater number than one. And so I guess, and this comes from some of our experience in New York, because I'm here with Nancy Shankman. And one of the things that we encouraged people to do was to take a look at the overall impact of the work and to assess those numbers so that at the end, because it would be a great resource to the rest of the nation, frankly, if through this project you could say, here's where we started, this is how many music educators there were practicing in our schools, we did this work, and as a result, is that more of these people got hired, right? And actually there was a greater, at the end, the net number was higher. That would be a fantastic thing for other states to be able to say, look, if you go through and you do this work of responding to the national standards in a local way, you can end up with more music teachers, which is what we all want, right?
Absolutely. My personal philosophy is I believe that all kids are creative somehow. Some of them are going to be music, some of them are going to be visual artists, some of them are going to respond better kinesthetically. Everybody is creative somehow, and we have to find ways to tap into that because those are their personal strengths. Yeah. To address your question, we've talked about this. This has been a partnership between the Division of the Arts in Louisiana and the Department of Education. And we've had some of these discussions, and they're still ongoing. But to be able to tell you definitively, yes, that that's exactly what we're going to do, I'm not in a position to say that today.
Right, and I understand, and you said, with New Jersey that they had done this, inventory of the spending, right? And they're in the process of doing that and finishing that up.
And that's one small piece of what they did. There's a lot. They looked at the community, they looked at the educators, they looked at the students, they looked at the funding, they looked at policies. And I'd highly encourage anyone to go look at artsednj.org to see what they've done. They have their original rollout available online as well as their report, which is very easy to read.
But I guess what I'm saying, Richard, to you is that it seems to me that you're in a position to actually do a simpler kind of thing than what New Jersey's doing. And it's just counting, right? It's a counting process. But it's also the kind of thing that my experience in going around the country has been that often what will happen is that these projects will take root, people will work on the curriculum part of it, they'll get very excited about publishing the curriculum, but then the basic thing of just counting and assessing what's happened gets left behind, and it's kind of like, whoops, we forgot. Right? And I guess I'm just saying to you, Richard, like I'm hoping that you, Richard, are going to make sure that counting happens because it seems to me that if the outcome is a good one, and either way, you have to assess it honestly and frankly, but what a great success story that would be, and I think you have the chance to do that. So I'm hoping that the counting won't get
left behind. How could we leave counting behind? No, I'm hoping to do some of that personally as a research project that I'm working on at the university. So I don't know yet that we have it. What I can't say is that we've officially decided that we're going to do something like that because the environment I'm working in, I haven't been told that we're doing that yet.
Right. Well, you can say when you were at Loyola, you were encouraged.
Yeah,
right?
They told me to,
yeah.
Yes.
I think it's a great project that you're doing. So
thank you very much.
Good luck with it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good luck.
And I think that, go ahead.
Richard, I think I better stand up. Tom and I know from experience what a gargantuan task you've undertaken. My question is about the funding, because I noticed the little caveat at the end of the act that said subject to available funding. And that's not just here, that's of course everywhere, because arts education is always the first thing to be cut. But my question goes farther than that. How are you going to ensure that the monies that the state gives to the schools will be spent on arts education?
That has yet to be determined. That's the best answer I have right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. We struggled with that. We originally had categorical funding for the arts, and there was a way to track it, and principals were held accountable. And now that's not that way anymore. I'm not there, and I'm not in that position anymore. But I think.
Let me interrupt for just a second.
Yeah.
And let me tell the audience that if that's something that you think is important, that's something you write to your legislator about. That's something you write to your state school board member and say, we need to have categorical funding. Because right now, one of the things that I've learned through this, if you don't know how much money you're getting, it's a lot harder to ask for more. You have to know what you're getting first. That way you can also turn around and say, this is the good I did with it. Could I please have some more? Because I'm going to do this good with it for your children.
Yeah, and the principal needs to know how much money he's getting. It can't all just be put into the same pot as math money and reading money, because the principal, as well-intentioned as he or she is, may not do the right thing just because he or she doesn't know. So we used to have regional arts supervisors in New York City. Each one was assigned a region, and it was their responsibility to go into the schools and see exactly what was happening. And New York is a very big city, and there were now I think there are over 1,400 schools in New York City. And so they don't have that anymore. A lot has happened since we've done this in 2004. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was the professional development for the classroom teacher. Because if the classroom teacher, in New York State, we used to have common branch teachers, they were called, for elementary school. And music teachers did not have a license to teach music in elementary school. It was only middle school and high school.
Okay.
But we have legislated and got a K through 12 certification in New York State. So music teachers can teach in the elementary school on a regular license, not just teach down from having a middle school license. But if in fact the music teachers or the classroom teachers are going to be held accountable for doing the work in the elementary schools as well, then I think you've got your work cut out for you to do professional development for not only the music teachers, but for the classroom teachers as well.
The plan we're considering is to do a regional model where the first group of people I'm going to go to are the people that have worked on these documents and give them the opportunity to help create professional development for our teachers. The other neat thing about the professional development that's in the legislation is it's also for administrators. That hasn't always happened. And so that's another piece that we have to do this coming school year is do professional development with administrators. And I'll also tell, again, the future music educators, you do too. You educate more than the students. I'll just leave you with that thought.
Well, I want to wish you best of luck on your work.
Thank you very much.
We know what a job you have ahead of you, but it looks like you've got off to a good start, so congratulations.
Thank you very much.